Greetings, one and all. Chris Courtney here, New Pragmatic. Super excited to have you along for this week's edition of the weekly workshop. Tonight, we're going to be discussing information design and the contextual questions that surround basic information design. When you are in the process of designing information, you're basically trying to make information and data more palatable for consumption for the end user, whatever that end user, whoever that end user may be, wherever that end user may be actually consuming the information, whether it's in a printed piece of work, whether it's on a device, whether it's on a screen that you're viewing from 100 yards away. It's all information design, but the contextual questions that surround it are the same between them. So we're going to be investigating some of those questions that you're going to have as you're working through your projects, and particularly if you're a New Pragmatic student, some of the questions that you will have as you're working through the exercises that are in the interaction design course. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to get this underway. So once again, this is Information Design and Context. I am your host, Chris Courtney, and I'm super excited to have you along. I'm going to be diving into a series of common questions that I often get from students, and I've basically boiled it down to the set of 5 or 6 questions that come up again and again and again. And one of the first ones that comes up gets back to the idea of how we use space inside of the elements that we design. The question I always get from students is, should I use a grid when I'm designing small elements, little components? And the answer is absolutely, 100%. Grids are not for pages alone. Of course, when we walk through them, we begin introducing people to the grid. We tend to introduce students and new designers to the grid by placing it on something that is meant to organize a large amount of information. But you can just as easily see the grid at work anytime you look at a site like this is from Grubhub, all right? And when you look at each of these components, it's very easy to lock a grid down over the top of the component and see exactly how the grid has helped establish the boundaries for the information that's been designed. And even when you take it into this wireframe, of course I've added some green to kind of indicate where the photo is. Even when you look at the wireframe, it's very easy to see how the grid has been used to establish hierarchy and add clarity to the information. And it's really as simple as this. When I look at a component, I'm trying to digest that information. And if I look at the next component, it should be similar. If the components are similar, are supposed to be delivering similar information, there should be no difference aside from the information itself moving around. So if I'm not using a grid, I risk coming up with new components over and over and over again. But if I'm designing with a grid, I make it very clear to everybody that I'm working with, starting with the developers and the other designers that are sitting to the right and left of me, that the intention is for this component to be consistent throughout the design. I'm not moving the bookmarking button around. I'm not moving the stars a little bit over this way or that way. I'm applying a grid consistently to the work. Equally, you can use this to help you design for where things aren't. And we're going to talk about dynamic data in a little bit. The big thing that I want you to realize is that a grid used smartly, like here with the Guardian, can help you design when the data isn't there. So here they have a top 10 list. Well, obviously, the issue here is if I wasn't paying attention, I could very easily design this and then get myself into a problem when I got to the 10th item. But because I'm applying a grid to this small component, I'm very aware that I should be reserving space for that so that it can continue down through the number 10. Obviously, if this was a top 20, I would have to save space for a wider pair of characters with the 2 and the 0. So I would have to expand upon this. So again, the grid is helping us because it's keeping us consistent, and a consistent design is a design that is easier to consume. The whole focus of a grid on a component is so that when the information changes shape, the component itself is resilient. When you look at this, it's Comet Chat Go and Comet Chat Pro. The text is a little longer on Comet Chat Pro, but it still works. The number of icons, the works with, is a little longer on Comet Chat Pro. The interesting thing here is there's only 10 additional resources for Comet Chat Pro, but there are like 40 different tie-ins with Comet Chat Go. So it's interesting that that they actually show more icons with this one, but less with that. Ultimately, it's up to you as the designer how you work with that. But knowing that information is dynamic means that having a grid that is consistent is that much more important. Another huge question that comes up. So grids kind of handle space. Tight is a massive question for designers. And this is something that is very specific to context. It's the contextual layers of information. It's what the display is, where the user is. There's all sorts of things that need to be addressed here. And that's why it really depends. It depends on what the content is. It depends on where it's being displayed. And there's even more considerations. But the big two are what's the content and where is it being displayed. So for instance, the way I like to look at it is, what job do I need this type to do? Do I need this type to deliver a really big splash on a page to grab attention? Do I need it to deliver a long passage of text? Do I need it to deliver a score or data? Like, there's all sorts of different jobs for type to do, and we need to think about the typography we use in terms of the job it's intended to do on the information. So again, back to that Grubhub display of the 4 pizza components. And boy, it's dinner time, so I hope I'm not hurting anybody here. Of course, you can eat pizza for breakfast too. When you look at the 3 typefaces that are displayed here, and actually it's one typeface, it's IBM Plex, but it's at 12 pixels, 18 pixels, and 24 pixels. When you look at that and you compare it to the components above, you can see that it's very clear that the text inside of the component, the number of minutes, the lunch specials, the free dumplings, those things are all closer to the 12 pixel territory. Then you get into like the name of the restaurant, Sarapino's Pizzeria, Slice Factory. That's much closer to the 18. But when you look at the label up top, Offers Near You, that's much closer to the IBM Plex 24. Understanding how this hierarchy is set up across the component is really helpful, because it really assists your user in scanning the information and finding what they're looking for. Again, information design is all about making decision making easier and adding clarity. If I'm wanting to go across and I'm looking for a particular restaurant, what I really want to jump out is I want the restaurant name to jump out. But equally, if I'm looking for the ratings, I want those stars to jump out. And I can tell that of these 4 that are showing, there's 2, the one in number 2 and number 4, those are the highest ratings. But if I'm looking for the number of ratings, I can see that very quickly. And that's because this typography is all displayed really consistently from one component to the next. Grids add consistency. Typography add consistency. But understanding what size should I be displaying this information at comes down to understanding how you're going to apply hierarchy to the actual component that you're designing. Again, smaller information, it's in this 12 to 18 range. When we're looking at headlines, like this one from the South China Morning Post, it's 24 pixels and up. So we're clearly ruling out those other 2 offerings that you wouldn't want a 12 pixel headline or a 18 pixel headline. Everything that's on the screen right now is in the 24 pixels and up range. And 24 is, I'm working in I'm working in ranges of 6 right now, so 12, 18, 24, 30. You could also work in ranges of 8, so 8, 16, 24. You could work in ranges of 10, 10, 20, 30. Whatever you do, I like being consistent with the scale that I use to go up the sizing tree, if you will. The other thing to realize is that it's all about context, and the job that the typography needs to do, plus that context, gives you a Goldilocks type of approach. What I've done here is I've taken the South China Morning Post. There's a story recently about Chinese fishermen, and I've taken that story and I've edited the browser to display it at 12 pixels, at 17 pixels, and at 24. Now, the reason I picked 17 was that was the size that the South China Morning Post was using. But as you can see, 12 pixels would be really small, and you wouldn't really want to read a lot of text at 12 pixels online. 12 pixels in print, or 12 point in print, fine. 12 pixels, too small. 24 pixels, that's too big. It's not going to be a great reading experience. You're going to be constantly scrolling because honestly, there's not enough text on the screen. 17 is literally just right. And what you'll find that news organizations and any place that does a lot of storytelling, they all gravitate to this particular size. So if you look at the South China Morning Post, the New York Times, and the Guardian, they all feel roughly the same. And it's because testing has shown over time that this size combined with a book type width, and when I say a book type, I literally mean a book type width. When we go in here and we look at this printed page, it has a relatively narrow measure by comparison to what a browser could be. So it's not just the type size, it's also the constraint of the width of the text. Now, you don't need to display it as if it was a newspaper in a really narrow column, because that isn't a great type width to read typography in either. What we found over time is that, those books that have been around for hundreds of years, the typographers that are behind those books were really freaking smart. They learned over time what that proper width was. It's actually the Bringhurst rule of 66, and I would break that book out if I knew exactly where it was, but I don't. I typically have it like right here. I don't right now, but I'm pretty sure that's because I'm using it. The other question to ask yourself when you're considering typography size is how far away is the user? And this is something that trips up new designers, because when you're getting started, you don't often think about how far away you are from the thing that you're trying to consume. Now, when you go in to read about suggested viewing distance, this is from an organization that focuses on optometry, so the people who actually fit you for your glasses. And when you're looking at a mobile device, they're saying about a foot. So you're talking about a foot from your nose, your eyes, to the device. Some people hold it a little further away, some people hold it closer, but it's about a foot. Your computer screen, the computer screen that I'm working with right now, is about 2 feet away. I would never zoom all the way in and look at I would never have a computer screen this far away from my face. But 2.5 feet, very doable. A car display. When you think about car displays, it's kind of like your computer. The one caveat I'll say about a car display is a lot of times there's 2 displays. There's one in the middle and there's one just off your vision in the center. So it's 2 feet, but there's also an angle to it, and that's something to take in mind. And it's recommended that you're 10 feet away from your television. So when you think about type sizes, it's really odd that when you compare, I'm using the South China Morning Post again because I love their website. When you look at the South China Morning Post and you look at their desktop version and their mobile version, the type is the same size. And you might be asking yourself, well, why wouldn't the mobile size shrink significantly? First of all, you can shrink it, okay? You don't have to keep it the same size. But there are considerations outside of just how far away the user is from the device that they're reading. A lot of it has to do with moving. So your mobile device is never stable. It's never completely still. There's always some sort of variance in your hand. It's shaking or moving. You could be walking. There's something going on in the environment. You're never holding a perfectly still device. Your computer, on the other hand, is typically stable. You're not walking around with your computer. It's on a desk. The car display is in fact moving. You're moving. You're being jiggled around by the car, typically, at least a little, no more, no less than the movement of your hand when it's holding a device. Television, on the other hand, typically pretty stable, unless you're in some sort of earthquake or waterbed. Your television is pretty stable. So what that translates to is, on a mobile device, if we set the base type size as 18 pixels, well, clearly a 1x on that is going to be 18 pixels. Same for the computer, it's 18 pixels. A car display, the minimum, if I'm looking for a base typography size, I'm going to put it at like 36 pixels. It's got to be a little bit bigger. Actually, it's got to be significantly bigger because I'm in a car. I don't have time to try to pinpoint information, which tells me that I also need a lower information density on the screen when I'm dealing with a car interface, because I need to be able to quickly find information. I can't hunt and peck for it. Can't hunt and peck for it. And then your television at 5x, like, you're 10 feet away, 5x the size. You're at 90 pixels for things that on your computer would be like 18 pixels. So lots bigger on the typography. Another common question is, how should I organize the information? And this is obviously contextual, but there are some considerations that go beyond just what type of information is it? Is it like a menu listing? Is it a treaty? Is it a data display? Let's move beyond that and let's talk about importance. Okay, the first thing that you need to be looking at when you're considering the data to display on the screen is importance. And when we look at, like, let's just go to Amazon. Okay, Amazon. If we look at the Eureka Power Speed bagless upright vacuum cleaner, all right, there's a ton of information on the screen. There's always a place for this. The place for this is not on the listing page where we're showing a number of items for a user to compare which vacuum that they happen to want. So in this particular version, you can see that Amazon has chosen the search term, the photo, the name, a rating, price, and whether you can get it shipped on Amazon Prime. Those are the options. So they had all of this and they decided to show this. And it gets back to what we talked about just a moment ago. Decision making. What's going to help me make a decision? Well, ultimately, I'm looking at the Eureka Power Speed bagless upright and the Shark Navigator and the Dyson V7. Funny name, Sharks, Power Speed, Animal Pro, very aggressive vacuum cleaners. What am I making my decision on? Am I making my decision on the number of stars? They all are pretty equal. Am I making my decision on the overall price? I have $59.99 to $329. That's an expensive vacuum. Am I making my decision because one of them has a coupon? This is what Amazon has decided their users typically base their decision on. The picture is pretty important because a lot of people remember the type of vacuum that they're looking for or the type of product they're looking for by visual. So having that visual out there is very important. Ultimately, it comes down to these little nuggets of information were lifted and brought out to the listing. Understand what's important and what needs to be put in front of the user first to help them make the decision to come through to a detail page like this. It's about editing. And ultimately, what is important changes with context. Case in point, let's go get some ribs on the south side, all right? I got slab barbecue, and I got limbs, and Chicago Smurgs. I got lots of stuff here, right? And when you look at this information, what you'll notice is I have name, I have the rating, I have the cost, the style of barbecue, the location, I have the hours, the photo, and the comments. And some of them have one comment with each. That's what Google has determined to be valuable to show to a user when they first search ribs. And they're on the map. All right? Now let's click through to one of those, and what changes? Well, the photo moves up in importance. Like the first thing that they show is the photo, although I will argue that the photo is poorly displayed here. A lot of that comes down to what photo did they load, but I'm not sure really what you're supposed to show behind the search box there. The name gets bigger. The rating is there. The style is there. Then we have a whole host of things. Directions, save, nearby, send to iPhones, etc. The big thing that's moved is the hours. And that's because I'm not going to bother clicking through if I see that it's closed. But once I see that it's open, I don't necessarily need to know the hours. So is it open? Yes. How do I get there? So is it open? I don't need directions yet. I haven't decided where I'm going. It is open. How do I get there? It's about context. Finally, let's talk about dynamic information, because so much of your design work is going to come down to working with things that you have no control over. Ultimately, the information that flows into your designs is going to be variable, which means it's going to be constantly changing, and it's dynamic. It's out of your control. So some dynamic elements that you will work with, this is Spotify, by the way, some dynamic elements that you work with will change, but they'll always have a common size. Now, you've probably picked up on what it is in this screen. It's the albums. The actual album art is always square. Nobody releases album art that's a different shape. Just like movie posters. Movie posters are traditionally shot vertically. If somebody releases a different one, that's the alternative. That's the other option. But you can always count on certain media types retaining a particular shape. You cannot count on the name of the band, the name of the album. All of that is variable. You can count on the category to be the same, like every album has a name, but you can't count on every album to fit here. Green Day, perfect example. Green Day Dookie fits, Green Day American Idiot fits, but when we, and this is just a search term for green, but Creedence Clearwater Revival, first of all, the band name is very long. Second of all, Green River 40th doesn't fit. So you have to have some way to handle that. Here they handle it with truncation. I would argue that they should have at least a couple of lines here for every album name, because if you look at it, 3 of the 6 albums that we're showing are truncated. So this design isn't flexible enough. But when you get over here, and this is on the actual album page, you can now see the full length of that, and it's the 40th anniversary edition. There's a reason why this doesn't have the band's name next to it, and it's because it would continually run in. There would be continual issues if these things were not stacked vertically. Same thing with the song name and the band name. It might seem like you could easily put this information to the outside or put this information down here, over here. This looks like a lot of dead space. But there are a lot of songs out there that are just long strings of text, and then you would have a problem. So the much easier thing to do is just to leave this very clean, and it's very easy, and we'll get into this when we talk about form design in a couple of weeks. And we're going to have the weekly workshops. We're going to have one on type, and then we're going to have one on form design coming up in the next coming week, so I hope you will tune in for that. When you look at this, it's very easy to go top to bottom. The eye just moves in a straight line right on down. It's very hard to move back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So in this particular instance, this design is very strong. But you have to really bank on the fact that you're going to get some really long names, some really long album titles, some really long sandwich names, some really long restaurant names. Names are extremely variable. And I really want to encourage you to think hard about how do you show the proper amount of consideration to your fellow human when they have 2 and 3 names, or their name is hyphenated. Your name may not be Joe Smith or Anna Lamb. All right, your name may be really long, and if it's really long, you want to feel welcome and included in the world. So you want to consider people that have long names. There's nothing worse than seeing your name truncated. And trust me, I know a lot of you out there are watching this, you're nodding your heads because you've had that happen to you before. You've been logged in somewhere, you look up and your name is initialized or it's truncated. Like, give space for your user's name to show up, at least like the last name or the first name. Make a decision there. Make them feel like they've been considered. It's an easy thing to do. And trust me, when you think this is a long name for Fiona Apple, this is a long name for Fiona Apple. When the pawn hits the when the pawn hits the conflicts, he thinks like a king and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that's an actual album title name from 1999. I always bring it out when I talk about variable length data because it's the longest album title that I can think of. That's at least come out in my day and age. So the dynamic data that you are constantly going to be tackling: names, people, places, titles, addresses, posts, comments. Like, there is no common size for anything that's posted except for Twitter. 240 characters. Used to be 140? No, 280? I can't remember anymore. Price. And then the features. Features. You may have a short list, you may have a long list. It's variable. You gotta consider options for beyond what you can envision for, and what that really means is you just have to design with variability in mind. Make it flexible. Don't stack information side by side. Stack it tall when you can so that you have room to breathe. Pixels are free. Pages can get long. But if you begin stacking things side by side in tight little spaces, you're going to have trouble. So I'm Chris Courtney. Chris@newpragmatic.com is the email address. If you have questions, I encourage you all to reach out. If you have questions, you can always obviously reach me at the email address, but you can also join our Discord community. I'm in there every day answering questions from students. We're doing live review of projects in the feedback loop every morning at 9 a.m. Central, and I hope that you would join us there. Without further ado, I'm Chris Courtney for New Pragmatic, and I will see you later. Take care.